Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our spring preview for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Spring practice opened up earlier this week, 15 practices, and then April 13th, the spring game will go down in Ohio Stadium, right there in the Horseshoe in Columbus. And this is a fun team to break down, Nick, every spring because there's always so much to talk about, and that also includes them once again coming off another disappointing season. I picked the Buckeyes last year to win the national championship. Obviously, that includes going undefeated, and they just were not able to accomplish that in the bowl game. Plenty of opt-outs, had no quarterback, not worried about that. But losing to Michigan again, certainly very disappointing. But, the morale around Ohio State early on in the offseason after the loss to Missouri, it was very gloomy, Nick. And then they quickly changed things around with a lot of guys coming back, added some nice transfers, even added Chip Kelly here just recently. The sentiment around Ohio State right now, it's an all-time high for me, at least in the peak of the offseason.
I think Ryan Day knew his seat was starting to get really hot. 3 straight losses to Michigan, really struggling to figure it out. And, they thought Kyle McCord was the savior, and he looked pretty good throughout most of the season, but then that bad interception into the game sealed the deal, and Michigan goes on and wins a national championship. Jim Harbaugh leaves, and, that starts to make things look a little bit better here for Ohio State. Ohio State, they bring in, like you said, bringing in Chip Kelly. I think it's a great move. Ryan Day, though, you could feel that his seat was starting to warm up for, 90% of programs, 95% of programs. He's done a fantastic job. For Ohio State, they expect national championships every single year. They've not won one since 2014-15. They made the national title game in the COVID year and got blown out by Alabama. Since then, they've struggled across the board. You could argue they probably should have beat Georgia if it wasn't for injuries, but I'm not going to make that case right now. They haven't beat Michigan in 3 years. Things are getting dicey in Columbus. They want to win now. They want to win a national championship as soon as possible in Buckeye land, and Ryan Day knows that his seat is hot. So he went out and made some moves. They made a ton of transfer moves that we're going to highlight that are extremely important. Brought in Chip Kelly, which I think was a very valid move. They tweaked the defense a little bit, moved some pieces around that could work in their favor, and now they're in a prime position to be the favorites to win the national championship, in my opinion. They have a fantastic roster top to bottom, and they have that expectation that they have to go out and get the job done. The schedule isn't terribly difficult as well. There are some big names on it, and we will certainly highlight that at some point. But overall, I think this is a team that is as talented, if not the most talented team in the country. They're a phenomenal roster top to bottom. Ryan Day has no excuses anymore.
The offense really underperformed last year. Really, Kyle McCord, he had a good season overall, but the ceiling really just seemed to tap out. They never really exceeded met the expectations they should have. They gradually got better, and then it just halted, and it never really got any better. They're hoping Will Howard is going to be the answer. 5,700 plus career passing yards, 48 touchdowns, 19 rushing touchdowns, 6'5", 242. Natural pocket passer with a big arm, plenty of mobility. He's a willing runner, falls forward with that size, and pretty impressive speed. He's ripped off plenty of big runs. He's a live runner near the goal line. I like the high arcing ball he throws with. He showcased some nice patience when he identifies a winnable matchup or the open man. Tendency to force the ball in traffic, though. He had 10 picks this year. Accuracy and efficiency, 61% this past year is a career high for him. Things he certainly needs to improve on. I think he's a really good fit here with the stature and the arm strength, and I certainly think that a lot of the positives here, Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, they're absolutely going to eat up, and I think this is a quarterback who's going to progress immensely. And, he wasn't the only transfer that got Quinshon Judkins' sudden departure from Ole Miss. He ends up here. This is a phenomenal player, a hard physical runner, elite contact balance, runs like a bull, good acceleration in the open field. Some real great burst on those inside zone runs. He gets plenty of goal line work himself. Seems to be the ideal fit as the backs under Ryan Day. They typically have some combo of those traits, but the one that's always true is size and physicality under Ryan Day at the running back position. Judkins a perfect fit, Nick. Howard, I think he'll eventually really grow, and I think the ceiling's probably going to be higher than it was last year, where, again, the offense ultimately underperformed.
I think the ceiling is higher with this offense. I think Will Howard is a great signal caller they grabbed from Kansas State. He looked really good for that team. I think he was finding himself in a groove and was comfortable. He got better throughout his career out there in Manhattan, Kansas. He's a very talented player. I like the frame on him. Very strong, physically bodied quarterback, and he's a good leader as well in the locker room. A guy that's got a veteran player, a guy that's been around college football that can certainly coach and lead the players. Of course, they also added another superstar quarterback in Julian Sayin from Alabama in the portal. Sayin not going to play this year most likely, but he's right there waiting to play for his opportunity. He's a great 5-star that was at Alabama, obviously. Howard 6'5", 242. I like that size a lot. I think he's got a really nice arm very solid player, can run if he needs to. Quinshon Judkins was a great ad as well. Judkins, the split with Ole Miss doesn't make a lot of sense to me still. I think, it is a bizarre split. I think he could have had a great opportunity to be the number one back for a team that looks primed to also compete for a national championship down there in Oxford, Mississippi. But Judkins, there's no doubting the talent he has. Lane Kiffin kind of plucked him out of nowhere, pulled him out of a, low-level high school ball in Alabama. He wasn't getting really any looks across the board. He ends up in Ole Miss and just dominates a true freshman. Has a bit of a down year in his second season, but he is such a talented player, a great runner, physical runner, nice end zone threat certainly for this team. TreVeyon Henderson is a great back as well when he's healthy. He's a really good leader too. He's been around this program for a while. 926 yards rushing last year, 5.9 yards per carry, and 11 scores for him. Also 20 grabs out of the backfield as a passing threat, so certainly dual threat opportunity there with TreVeyon Henderson. This offense, at least between the quarterback and the running back room, is shaping up to be a very strong unit.
Devin Brown's still there. Processing is a big issue for him, it seems. He's an athletic player, though. I think he'll be, admirable in a backup role if they need him to do so. And, like you alluded to, Henderson coming back, massive news for them. Him and Judkins, this is going to be an elite duo. Good breakaway speed. He's really electric on the open field. Nice burst. He's mainly a one-cut back. He's a solid pass catcher with some nice contact balance. He was the real spark for this offense last year. You've seen him when he ripped off that big, 50, 60-yard touchdown run against Notre Dame in a low-scoring contest. 926 and 11 scores for him. Nice duo they have here with Judkins. They're going to be able to keep them fresh all year long. Dalton Hayden burned his red shirt last year, so they do have a nice little trio at running back. This room is going to continue to be stout, even with Mayan Williams' departure. The wide receiver room is obviously a big question mark. Marvin Harrison departs. Julian Fleming never really lived up to expectations. He's off to Penn State. Emeka Egbuka, though, this guy was projected to be a first or second round draft pick. He lines up in the slot a good bit, covers ground fast in terms of yards after catch. He's a good route runner, really finds that soft spot in zone. He's going to be the leader for this room. Egbuka is going to have a lot of pressure on his shoulders, as will some of these other younger guys. Carnell Tate, he should be an X-receiver, a good route runner, real smooth athlete, does a good job tracking the ball, could play inside if needed. Brandon Ennis, another guy who's, pretty much a five-star competitive player, real explosive out of his stance. He can separate with those quick feet, does a nice job plucking the ball out of the air, has also really improved his yard after catch game in terms of plays in the open field. You have two incoming five-stars, Jeremiah Smith and Mylan Graham. Despite losing Marvin Harrison and not being as deep as they were probably 2 seasons ago, where they had numerous first-rounders on the same roster, Nick, they're still incredibly loaded with talent. Experience is the biggest question mark here, though.
I think experience is certainly the biggest question mark when you look at this team. There are some solid players, obviously, coming out of the high school ranks. Jeremiah Smith out of Florida, 6'3", 214, a really big physical wide receiver, a guy that can go up and make a play if he has to. I like the speed on him as well. He's a very solid player, top to bottom. He's a good player that can work out really well for this team. Mylan Graham, I beg your pardon, is a great player, 6'1", 170. So I think he's got some speed, high upside there as well. Obviously, you look at Smith, a big, bigger physical frame. I like the frame a little bit on Smith, just a little bit more. But overall, I think these are two great players. They're coming out, obviously, high-level recruits that could look to get some time early on. Emeka Egbuka, very underrated player, in my opinion. 515 receiving yards this past season, 12.6 yards per grab, and 4 scores for him. A really good player, that had some good experience as well. A nice veteran for the locker room. Carnell Tate, limited catches for him, 18 for 264 yards, 14.7 yards per grab, and 1 score for him. Another player that has some experience that they can get in there. A little bit of veteran experience. This is a young room, right? I think it's certainly important to note that this is a group that is very young. Brandon Ennis as well is another guy that really didn't get a whole lot of grabs. Only got 1 grab last year. He's a younger guy as a sophomore. So it's a younger unit. I think that's certainly something to keep your eye on. They do lack that sort of veteran leadership outside of Egbuka at wide receiver, but they are still very talented. A lot of high upside talent there.
Yeah, you certainly wonder if, the lack of experience is going to cause the growth to be kind of stunted this year as well through the passing attack. I don't think it will be, because I definitely think this running game is going to be a little bit better than it was a season ago, and that leads us to this offensive line. We said the biggest issue of Ohio State was the O-line. I know a lot of people who are just casuals who are questioning the quarterback position. I was like, the offensive line is the biggest focal point here. They're still going to be able to move the ball at an adequate rate, 138 yards per game rushing for Ohio State. Not a good number for the Buckeyes. This is a team that wants to run the ball first, and they had to kind of move their way into a pass-first offense last year. And, with McCord in his first year as a starter, that just really wasn't the answer. They could have did that under C.J. Stroud, no issues, right? But last year, the running game was just not great. And if they did not have TreVeyon Henderson, they would have been in a world of hurt, because this guy really carried the offense at times. I remember that drive against Michigan, late in the third quarter, where they were able to take the lead with a physical rushing attack. It was really Henderson in this offensive line starting to get things going. Didn't see it enough throughout the season, though, but I think the staff is pretty happy with what they have. Look at left tackle Josh Simmons. He came over from San Diego State. I was pretty happy with him a season ago because he was abysmal, really, for the Aztecs. Comes over here, only gives up 1 sack. I think the staff is very happy of his progression and what he may be able to provide this year. Donovan Jackson, left guard, he improved a good bit as a pass blocker. Gave back some that was in terms of being, an impactful run blocker. Should perform at his best this year, which would be at an All-American level. Donovan Jackson, I think, has a lot of potential, probably the most of anyone on this line. Looking at center, Seth McLaughlin, they pick him up from Alabama. We'll talk about him here in a second. Carson Hinsman struggled significantly during 2023, so that's why they go out and upgrade with a guy who, had his own issues. Josh Fryer at right guard. It looks like they're going to be moving him inside. This is a guy who seems more comfortable, though, at tackle. Shows, good lateral agility, improve his hands. His run blocking improvements might be the reason why they want to move him to guard. They're going to get a look at him during the spring on the inside and see if that sticks. Luke Montgomery at right tackle, 4-star true freshman, an athletic, aggressive player, finishes his blocks. And that's the type of prowess they need up front to get this offense back to the gear they want it to be in. He was used a few times as an extra lineman, saw a couple snaps in total. And we'll talk about some of the reserves here in a minute. Seth McLaughlin, though, Nick, they go out and get this guy who at times just single-handedly costed Alabama. It came to fruition in the Rose Bowl, significantly played a factor in them losing that game to Michigan. What do you think's the idea here, with McLaughlin, who has a lot of experience, right? And Hinsman himself was not very good a season ago, but experience is a big factor, and maybe going into a second year as a starter, Carson could have improved, but they go out and get this guy who was the most hated man in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, this is a move that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me. I did not like Seth McLaughlin's performance as an Alabama fan. It just was absolutely frustrating. It really killed the season, in my opinion. One of the things that certainly played a massive damaging role. I thought Carson Hinsman wasn't too bad at center. When I first heard he was transferring, I assumed they were going to kick him into guard somewhere and try and move him because he is a really solid player in terms of the pass block and run blocking features of an offensive lineman. He just could not snap the ball for life, and which is one of the 3 biggest things you have to do as a center. So it did not make a whole lot of sense. I figured they would kick him in somewhere, but they like Josh Fryer, they like Donovan Jackson, so I don't really think there's any room for him to be moved at left or right guard at this point. It seems like they are going to roll him out at center, and I just don't really see the vision. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me at all. I think the mistakes are still going to be there. The mistakes are prone with this guy. I think he's going to continue to make the mistakes, and it could certainly come back to haunt Ohio State in the future.
Yeah, the snapping was just awful. We'll highlight some of the reserves here. And it's possible they might, throw him around at guard, maybe use Hinsman as a swing player. Enoch Lamai started at right guard in the bowl game. Struggled a great deal, but it was a guy they wanted to get a look at. Zen Mikowski. He was figured to be starting left tackle last year, but he only ended up seeing a few snaps all season with Simmons winning that role. Tegra Teshabola was an 5-star in the 22 class. He may also get some looks at right guard. So I think there's a lot to unpack here. Last year, Nick, we knew this offensive line would struggle losing guys like Paris Johnson and the DeJuan Jones as well. I think the improvement's going to be there. I think from a physicality standpoint, they're going to get back to being able to run the ball. I would hope at 170 yard per game level. Chip Kelly, obviously he loves physical offensive lines. The Bruins really had a strong rushing attack. Jackson, I think he's going to play at an all-time high level. Simmons, I was pretty happy with him. I was pretty shocked by how he played at left tackle. How dominant do you think they're going to be, though? Because a lot of people are thinking this offensive line has the potential to be one of the top in the conference. If Fryer can move the right guard and be impactful, and they get a guy like Luke Montgomery who has that prowess that they want to be able to run the ball, if he can be, a plug and play at right tackle, they might have something working here.
If Montgomery can really succeed at right tackle, this could be a great unit, one of the top units in the Big Ten. I'm a little more cautiously optimistic. I think this unit still has some issues that I really don't know if they've sorted out fully. I'm really concerned about center. I'm concerned about the left side at times, although Josh Simmons did look really good towards the back end of the season. I still have some concerns about the left side of the offensive line. I am a little concerned. I'm going to put it cautiously optimistic about this offensive line.
I think that's a good starting point for sure, and we'll see how they perform early on in the season. Because, we saw early on last year how bad this offensive was. They couldn't run the ball against Indiana. They were just struggling significantly on offense. A lot of people thought the Buckeyes were going to lose that game. And it was just periodically throughout the year where they could not pile on points because they couldn't run the offense they wanted to. And that certainly has to change if they want to get back to being able to win this conference and potentially even more. Moving to the defensive side of the ball, this is just going to be a fun thing to talk about, Nick, because this defense is absolutely stacked. I talked about early on in the offseason, they had a lot of guys who had decisions to make, and a lot of them seemed like they were going to be heading to the pros. And it seemed like day after day, they kept getting everybody back, and that quickly shaped up for this defense. I think it's big news for Ryan Day being able to get all these guys to buy in. Might have the nation's best front four. You start with JT Tumalau. Disappointing year in terms of production. Overall, he was still an impactful edge defender, but he was expected to, potentially blossom into a first-team All-American after an elite season in 2022. Former high-end recruit that he is off the edge. One guy that did show up, though, Jack Sawyer, former number one recruit in his third year, 48 tackles, double-figure tackle for losses, really showed his ability as a sack getter as well. This is a guy that really was impactful as a run defender himself. Sawyer was immense for this football team, but I think the experience combining, two former high-end five-star recruits off the edge, this is going to be nasty for Ohio State, Nick, and I definitely love Tyleik Williams. I've always been a big fan of his. He also hit double-figure tackle for losses, a nice gap clogger. Ty Hamilton, an immense veteran who's played a lot of snaps in his own right. This starting front four, it's got to be the nation's best. Obviously, we haven't taken a deep dive into every team in college football, but if I had to guess, this is going to be the number one at the end of the day.
If they're not number one, they're certainly, 2 or 3. They're in the top 3, in my opinion, of these front fours in the nation. JT Tuimoloau is a fantastic player, a great leader, 38 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 5 sacks for him, 2 pass breakups, good numbers early on. I think, he's producing a former 5-star. You want to see that production out of him, and you're getting it, which I think is super important when you're looking at this Ohio State team. Jack Sawyer, 48 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. Good numbers there. Tyleik Williams, 53 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 5 pass breakups. A really nice leader there. A good player. Ty Hamilton, underrated in my opinion. 38 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. He could be in line for a huge year, in my opinion. I think people are not talking about him enough in this interior defensive line right there at nose tackling. Ty Hamilton's a very underrated player, primed for a pretty strong year.
Yeah, Tuimoloau, an aggressive pass rusher, a pretty impressive athlete. Really good burst off the line of scrimmage. I like his power as well. Tyleik Williams, he has a nice explosion of his own. Really gets around that outside shoulder very well. Active hands. He even gets him up against the pass. He had 5 pass breakups this past season. He's got a nice core build and some nice strength. It's only going to continue to get better. So, very happy with this D line. And then we'll look at some of the guys they have that are also reserves on this side. They have plenty of size in the rotation. Caden McDonald, nice 320-pounder, high-ranked 4-star from last year's class. They're hoping they can get some looks from Caden Curry and Keontae Jackson. He was a top 100 recruit. Both of these guys were top 150 4-stars in the class of 2022. I think, another year under Jim Knowles, it's time for some of these guys to get unleashed. And I think if these backup edges can really step up, this is going to be an immensely lethal defensive front. And obviously, we love what they have in the starters and Sawyer and Tuimoloau. But if they can get guys like Curry and Jackson to step up, Nick, this is going to be, very tough to do anything against these guys.
I think Caden Curry's a good player, limited snaps for him, but 9 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Good numbers for him. I think Jackson as well, 7 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks. And they're limited snaps. They're more rotational pieces, but they could be dominant rotational pieces that could really get in there early on and make some noise.
And then we'll go ahead and look at some of the other notable Ohio State defensive headlines. What kind of impact will Sonny Styles have moving the linebacker? This is the most likely spot for him with the add of Caleb Downs. My initial reaction was that he's going to be going to inside linebacker. He does a great job of making plays in the box. He's a sound wrap-up tackler, very good run defender. He's listed at 6'4", 230 this past season. Just not the size you want playing in the back end. If you ever have to be up here cover 2 or even cover 1, it's just not going to work out for you. He played 20 more snaps in the box than he did in the slot or as a safety. He was strictly in the box, but then he was forced to play strong safety back half of the season with an injury to Latham Ransom. And that's when the inconsistency started to happen. He took a bad angle versus Blake Corum. A lot of big touchdown in the second half there. Was never a liability by any means in coverage. This is a better use for his skills. He figures to be one of the nation's most versatile defenders this season, Nick. I think Styles is a perfect fit here at linebacker. And, if he didn't have to go play in the back end where he started to play bad, this defense would have been much better off. But I think it was certainly good for him to be able to showcase that versatility a little bit. And he could also look at the tape and learn a good few things from last year where he was forced to play, the safety role.
Very versatile player, Sonny Styles. I don't love the move to linebacker. I think, he does have some issues in the secondary. I think Caleb Downs coming in shores that up. I think I'm a little bullish on it. I don't know exactly how well he's going to perform, but I think he's a very talented player and has all the upside in the world to make the opportunities to succeed at linebacker. This is a big opportunity for him to step up. 53 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him last year, and you kind of moved him around like you said. I'm very intrigued to see how he plays. I like this defense a lot. They run. I think Jim Knowles knows what he's doing, but there's a lot of big players that are losing. Certainly a player we're going to talk about in a second at linebacker who's very talented and has a lot of tackles they got to make up for.
That being Tommy Eichenberg. This was one of the most improved defenders in college football a couple seasons back. Vocal leader for them in the middle, a physical guy. And what will life be without him? Styles obviously is going to make that transition down. Should be great. This is Cody Simon's team now. This is a guy who played, a good amount of snaps last season. Was a very good around sound up tackler. Wasn't all that bad in coverage either. A pretty consistent defender overall. Of course, they lose Steel Chambers as well. So big, turnover here with the top two tacklers departing for them. Simon, though, this is a guy who, has nice quickness. He's, instinctive, pretty rangy in the box with some good angles. And he performed better as a pass rusher than I figured he would in a couple of attempts doing that. CJ Hicks, this is a guy who's a former 5-star. He's soaked in lots of knowledge over the last 2 years, very fluid in space. He's a coverage asset. He's pretty explosive as a rusher as well. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with his linebacking room. I think they might take a little bit of a step back with the defensive line they have in front of them. It's going to allow them to process a little bit slower, and I think as the weeks go on, these guys are going to be right in tune here in this 4-2-5. What do you make of this, Nick? Is Cody Simon, again, this is his team now, a lot of inexperience behind him.
I think there's a lot of experience behind him. Tommy Eichenberg's a great leader, a player that was so talented for this team, 82 total tackles this past season. They got to replace that. Obviously, that's tough to replace. Cody Simon's going to try and step up and be that guy. Simon, a good player, 57 total tackles in his own right, 3 tackles for a loss for him. He's got to step up and be that guy at linebacker. He's going to be the one that has to call out the plays. He has to be that quarterback of the defense, if you will, at that middle linebacker. I like this 4-2-5 a lot. I'm a huge fan of the 4-2-5. I think it's one of the more interesting defensive styles in college football. I like the way they run it in Ohio State. I think it's been working out very well. But Simon's going to have to step up and make those tackles and be that vocal leader. I want to see what he can do in the week 1, see if he's going to be that vocal leader that needs to be.
Yeah, and look at the secondary. We broke this secondary down in full a couple weeks ago, so we're not going to hammer on it too much. I'll leave that link in the description if you guys want to check that out. This secondary that was absolutely loaded. Caleb Downs, his addition, only further helps acclimate that claim. This is a guy who can play in the box or as a center fielder, really embraces contact, and a smooth, instinctive safety, a real student of the game, quickly arrives at the catch point. Hard hitter in the run game. He improved significantly in coverage. The first 3 games of the year incredibly poor. The next 3 were his best 3 of the season, I would say, in coverage. So Downs, this is a player that certainly, he's going to showcase work ethic, and it goes with the skills he has. Downs, phenomenal player here. Ohio State, they're going to be very happy to plug him in. Getting Latham Ransom back. Only played 8 games last year. Missed the last month of the season. Was doing much better in coverage, and in the past, he's shown the ability to do very well in coverage versus some elite tight ends. He's also a willing tackler in the box. I like how he hits with authority, some nice closing speed. Malik Hartford is a guy who, was a high-end recruit in the class of 23. We'll see if he gets on the field because he was projected to be the starter before Downs arrived. Great cornerback duo here. Denzel Burke, guy was, length, confident, press man corner, has some nice quickness underneath. Davis Igbeson pondered who the number 2 corner would be last year, and the Old Miss transfer emerged as that. They rarely rotated outside corners. He played 650 snaps and he only allowed 350 yards out wide. Highly regarded run defender as well. Really loves to attack the legs of those opposing runners. The full-time slot corner was also up for grabs, and Jordan Hancock, he ended up coming away with that one. 2 interceptions, 5 pass breakups, also showcased some nice closing abilities. I thought he was phenomenal in the slot. And then the guy who was really good as a 4-star true freshman, Jermaine Matthews, was sticky in man coverage. He was always right in phase with wide receivers. Real handsy players. Was never, he's a real handsy player who's never called for a single penalty. Shows great anticipation as well. They also added, 3-4 stars, guys like Bryce West, Aaron Scott, and Garrett Stover. This secondary is elite, Nick. The Jim Thorpe Award winners got to be coming from this back end. Obviously, they were top-ranked pass defense a season ago. Obviously, it's kind of a joke of a conference when it comes to quarterbacks. Penn State, though, couldn't do a lick of anything on them. And they even faced Luther Bird and Brady Cook, held them to 128 yards. I mean, this secondary is no joke. They're the real deal. Colston Loveland was able to, pick up some nice yardage against them when they played Michigan. And that ended up being a big difference maker for the Wolverines. That's the only blemish they have, though, Nick. This secondary is nasty.
A great unit got better by adding Caleb Downs, one of the most talented players in college football as a true freshman, just absolutely incredibly talented player. Heartbreaking to see him leave Alabama for someone like me. This is a unit that's incredible, right? Downs slots in there. He's a really great player. You can move him around. Latham Ransom is also a really good leader, a guy that's a veteran at this point. Davis Igbeson has SEC experience at Ole Miss, looked really good in his first year. Malik Hartford on the bench, a great rotational player for him. Jahad Carter, another solid player that this team has. Jordan Hancock, another good leader in this locker room, a guy that's got some good experience. This is a unit that's deep and very talented. Certainly think the Jim Thorpe Award winner will come from this unit somewhere. If I had to put money on it right now, I think Caleb Downs has got to be the pick for me. I think he's going to be an absolutely incredible player, a lightning rod player to plug in there and have success immediately. This is an incredible unit that got a lot better this offseason.
And I do make the claim that they play kind of a joke of a conference in terms of opposing passing attacks, but I do also want to admit how far this unit has come in terms of, playmaking, communication, discipline. I mean, back in 2021, they were just no good. And, even in 22, they had some of their issues. In 23, it finally came full scale. Jim Knowles has done great work with these guys, and the players have obviously put in a lot of work as well. So even though they've been playing some of the same teams, it wasn't always pretty for them. So I don't think that these numbers are skewed by any means. I think this is a legit secondary, 5 yards per attempt for the opposition. Held them to under a 53% completion rating. Very good unit overall. Not just a secondary, but this entire defense right now is projecting to be the nation's best. Ohio State, Nick, I think it's always fun to do the spring preview. A lot of expectations for them. I think this is a real good team with what they were able to accomplish in the offseason in terms of not just transfers, but people they were able to bring back. Got to applaud Ryan Day flipping the sentiment, which in mid-December looked incredibly gloomy.
I think it's an impressive move by him this offseason. He really saw the writing on the wall, and he got to work and did a ton of things that he had to do. Brought in Chip Kelly, brought in talented players across the board from the portal. This is a team that has improved throughout the offseason, and they put themselves in the pole position in the Big Ten, as well as nationally. This was a team that seemed like they were falling off. 3 straight losses to Michigan. They really couldn't seem to figure it out. Ryan Day, his seat was very hot, in my opinion, and now it's cooled off immensely. This is a team that has still extremely high expectations, but they put themselves in a great position to succeed. Certainly make the playoffs with a 12-team playoff, but most likely get a bye and advance further in this expanded competition. This team should certainly win the Big Ten, and they have a ton of talent to do those goals.
We'll go ahead and highlight the schedule real quick. Obviously, I thought last year was a pretty tough schedule, and obviously they managed it pretty well. The first 3 games, pretty much cakewalks. Conference opener, September 28th at Michigan State. They're going to host a physical Iowa defense October 5th. That'll be a great opportunity to see what this offense is really made of for the Buckeyes. They play in Eugene next week. It's going to be one of the biggest games of the year. Sandwiched in between that, you have at Penn State, and then, in between that is Nebraska. They host them. That's a daunting 4-game stretch there, Nick, beginning with the Hawkeyes, ending with the Nittany Lions. If they can make it through there, only thing you got left to really worry about is hosting the Wolverines, trying to get over that hump. But, that stretch right there in October that does include a bye week. It's going to be a tough one, but I think it's going to be one that's really, is a make or break for this football team.
That's a very tough schedule, right? Iowa, no joke on defense. They're going to be able to put up that talented defense on the road. I'm not sure how much they'll be able to hang, but it is certainly something to look at. At Oregon, that's a tough trip, right? Obviously, that's a uncharted territory for this Ohio State team heading out west and playing Dan Lanning's Oregon. Nebraska, we're very high on Nebraska this year. What could they do on the road in Columbus? Can they make some noise? There's an upset potential there on October 26th. Certainly a game I'm circling. At Penn State, whiteout potential on that game. They may pick that to be the whiteout. I haven't really looked at Penn State's schedule. That could be a whiteout. That's a whiteout. Obviously, that adds another level to it. Penn State, I'm not super high on them this year, so I think that game will be okay for Ohio State. And then Michigan later down the line, they got to beat them. They cannot lose 4 in a row to Michigan. That would just be absolutely unacceptable in Columbus. This is a team that has the schedule is manageable, right? The non-conference doesn't really do anything for you when you look at the actual conference games. The trip to Michigan State is not a really tough trip. Northwestern, not very difficult as well. At Oregon, at Penn State, yeah, those are very tough games, certainly, and games that we are circling.
Me up for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate joining me. Always fun to have the Buckeyes in the lab, a team we've really been focused on a lot so far in this off season. We'll touch on it again in a couple of months, and we'll see what the expectations are then, but it's going to be incredibly high, and I would say a 4-team playoff has got to be the goal here, and if not, like you've been saying, Day might be on his way out.
Certainly, I think Day's seat will be getting hot if they don't have postseason success this year.
Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.